Hello and welcome to my online public meeting regarding the child protection and re-inspection. I'm Commissioner Zoe and I will be chairing this meeting. Apologies that we've started a little bit late. Some of the attendees were experiencing some technical difficulties. So I'll just run through the agenda. There's no set agenda being published, and that's we're going to do introduction and my statement. We're then going to go to North Yorkshire Police for their presentation. We are going to do questions and then public questions, and then I'm going to make some closing remarks. So without further ado, on to my statement. So I welcome everybody watching today, and I've called this meeting to discuss mine and undoubtedly the public's concerns regarding the National Child Protection Re-inspection Visit Report, which was published today. The public meeting is one of the ways I hold the Chief Constable to account on behalf of the public. The Inspectorate visited North Yorkshire Police in November 2021 and made a series of judgments and improvements that were needed. The re-inspection report outcomes are totally unacceptable, given that North Yorkshire Police had a year to improve, and North Yorkshire Police, I believe, have let down the most vulnerable in our society. Not enough has been done, and there is simply no excuses. Therefore, I'm holding this meeting on behalf of the public to ask why and how this has happened. Now, I acknowledge that there are areas where improvements have been made, specifically changes to the training of staff and understanding vulnerability, and the notable increase in the quality and number of referrals for children to the local authorities, and the force control room referrals for children, and the force control room response to calls where children may be at risk. The re-inspection report also recognises that North Yorkshire Police work well with safeguarding partners and are sharing good quality information. And I'd like to thank our local authority partners, external agencies and the victim support services that I commission for the work they do in partnership with the force. However, my focus has got to be on the areas where we do not deliver for our most vulnerable. So Chief Constable Lisa Winwood and Assistant Chief Constable Scott Bisset, who are here today, I would like you to answer the following questions during the course of your presentation. The first one is, why did my team and I receive regular reassurance and assurance that all concerns from the 2021 report would be tackled head-on and improvements made at significant pace, but instead, 12 months later, North Yorkshire Police is not in the position the public or I would expect to be? 2, why are North Yorkshire Police not where they should be? 3, what are North Yorkshire Police doing about it? And 4, what has been done since the follow-up re-inspection in December 22? 5, when will all the recommendations made by the Inspectorate be completed by North Yorkshire Police? If anyone living in North Yorkshire doesn't feel confident or comfortable with the services offered by North Yorkshire Police, please let me know. And I would really encourage this. Please, if you would like to send a question or concerns to this address in this live meeting, please email info@northyorkshire-pfcc.gov.uk, or to ask a question on Twitter during the broadcast, post your question on Twitter using the hashtag #NYScrutiny. Thank you. Right, over to you, Lisa, who is going to be introducing this report, your PowerPoint, and also then on to Scott. So over to you, Lisa, please.
Thank you, Commissioner. And if I could just ask Dave to share the presentation, please. Can I just check? I've still got a black screen, but just checking, can anybody else see the presentation yet?
Yes, I can, Lisa, thank you.
I still have a blank screen, but I will start and hopefully it will pop up and I'll let you know if it doesn't, because I know which slide you're probably on, even though I can't see them at the moment. So first and foremost, and most importantly, I'd like to offer a sincere apology to every member of a family or a child who has been failed as a result of some of our improvements not being made swiftly enough. So hopefully, Commissioner, we will be able to answer the questions that you've posed throughout the presentation. But of course, when we get to the end of the presentation, if that's not the case, then please, come back to us if there are elements of it that have not yet been addressed as a result of the presentation. So moving on to the next slide, which should be the NCPI improvement timeline. Can I just check that everybody can see that and it's moved on?
We can, thank you.
Perfect, thank you. So this just gives an opportunity to talk through the timeline, some of which, Commissioner, you've already mentioned that's taken place throughout the inspection. So as you mentioned, in November 2021, the initial inspection was undertaken and we receive a hot debrief. So that's a verbal debrief from His Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary colleagues, and we act on that hot debrief immediately rather than waiting for a draft report or for the final report to be published. So a draft action plan was formulated following that last year, or November 21, should I say, and a gold command structure was set up under the Deputy Chief Constable for oversight to then work through that action plan. As you know, then the report was published in March 2022 and the formal report was published, and PAMs, or public accountability meetings, followed that, where updates were given on actions that had already been taken since the hot debrief and then actions that were due to be taken, and the action plan was developed further as a result of that. Then, as we know, in December 2022, the further formal inspection took place, followed by a hot debrief again. We formulated an immediate action plan to intensify activity on areas of improvement. And you will see on the slides that follow that the core intensification was around, out of 10 recommendations, 4 recommendations that hadn't been progressed in the manner or as swiftly as we would have liked. The other 6 recommendations have had detailed updates and progress made on them, which you will hear about during the presentation. And then, of course, today we've seen the formal report released by His Majesty's Inspectorate. So moving on to the next slide, please. So in terms of next steps, as you can see, the overarching comments of HMIC in respect of our next steps, you can see on the screen there. I won't read through it all in detail, but as you can see, we still need to improve in some areas, and we'll talk through those in a moment. We need better outcomes for children. You'll have seen the case studies in the report, but there has been some notable progress in respect of training that you've already mentioned, Commissioner, identifying children's vulnerability, good safeguarding referrals, good work with partners, and then the improvements in the force control room in terms of how we're answering calls. But despite that, we haven't made all of the progress that we need to do to complete the action plan. And again, some of those areas that have been achieved since December 22, and then the timelines going forward from here are included in the following presentation. I would mention that, of course, people will be aware from reading our full police efficiency, effectiveness, legitimacy inspection, our PEEL inspection, which took place in the autumn last year, which was published in March this year. There are also significant areas for improvement in that report that have impacted on the delivery of some of the improvements in the NCPI inspection, notably around demand profiling in terms of what resources are required, and you'll see some of the uplift in resources, and our ability to undertake effective audit and inspection in respect of some of our corporate services being inadequate. So I will pause there and hand over to ACC Bisset, who will now take us through the detailed outcomes for each of the recommendations. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chief. So if I move on to slide 4, please, David. I'm hoping you've got that up in front of you. So what you will see, Commissioner, is you asked a specific question in your opening about what's been done since December and the re-inspection, and the following slides will walk through every one of those 9 recommendations. One of them was remitted to a custody inspection, which is covered in HMIC's report, as you will have seen. So we will talk through what was done prior to December, critically what was done since December on each one of those, to highlight what has been done. But the 4 key ones that remain outstanding for us are, as you see on the slide, and as the Chief has mentioned, of the 10, we're in the process of submitting 5 to HMIC for sign-off on completion. But of course, it's really important that we focus on the areas of you have outlined that we need to improve. So they're the 4 recommendations regarding missing children, the standards of investigation, awareness of child sexual exploitation, and the management of offenders. I think it's important we see this in the context of wider organisational redesign and the response to the Peel inspection. Many of the people and the skills and capabilities that we need to effectively conduct this work don't come directly for the front line, with 50% of them having a lot of inexperience. We need to identify the capacity, grow it, and bring it through that pipeline of specialism, because they're very complex investigations, as we understand. I think most of the public would understand that. We need to have people who are experienced and able to conduct the role that we need them to. And the second point I'd really need to make, and I think this touches on one of your questions around the assurances that you received, is refocusing of assurance capability to really test that delivery, to really understand how competent, how well we deliver the services and the specialisms and the improvement to safeguard young people and children that I know that we all have a desire to make sure happens. So they're really some of the fundamentals to the improvement journey. If I can move on to the next slide, please, David. Okay, so what you will see then is the journey so far. The re-inspection in December 22, as the Chief's outlined, I won't repeat it, some progress identified, but a real clear recognition of insufficient improvement in other areas. The notable improvements I won't touch on because, again, you've already mentioned those in the introduction. Good relationships with statutory partners, and that continues to be the case, and I echo your comments about our statutory partners. But you also asked a question in your opening about when the actions will be completed. As we look at the timeline now, because I'm responsible for safeguarding and local policing, and I do manage this through the Vulnerability Board, which HMIC referenced in their report, the action plan is currently scheduled to be delivered by October 23. But what's included in there is the effective assurance and testing that I just mentioned on the previous slide. It's fundamentally important that both we understand we are implementing and embedding the best practice we can to safeguard people, but also you and the wider public receive trusted and tested assurance that that is the case. And I think that's key throughout this journey. We'll move on to the next slide, please, David. So I thought it was important to highlight the uplifted resources that have gone into safeguarding since the beginning of the year. So this is post re-inspection. And of course, we do understand that building the business cases and the capability to invest in a really critical capability like safeguarding takes a little bit of time. But phase 1 uplift, if I can just touch on it, you can see there an investment in our higher risk offenders and the way we manage those, understand risk and plan around them with an inspector. You can see an uplift into IOM, which is integrated offender management, and that's a really important part of our offender management approach, which you will see highlighted in recommendation 9 in some detail in the report. And we then move on to an uplift of 18 police constables. 5 are going into the vulnerability assessment team. You will see 6 into child exploitation. And that, of course, if you think back to the report, spoke about insufficient resources in the missing from home and exploitation team to really understand and mitigate risk of young people who go missing. That's what those individuals will do, and they will form a really important part in geographic hubs locally to work with partners to reduce that risk. A further investment in central resource in terms of missing children of 2 constables, an uplift in sex offender management of an additional 2 constables, a specialist to undertake polygraph work with sex offenders to ensure that they're telling the truth about their movements, their lifestyle, their access to technology and their behaviours, and an additional uplift of 2 into integrated offender management to complement the sergeant and to really strengthen that approach to management of offenders. So that was approved in February 2003. And when you return to the report and look at the areas that were really highlighted as key risks, you can see the reflection of investment in specialist resources against the highlighted risks that are outlined by HMIC. A later phase 2 uplift has then been agreed of a further 28 posts. And it should be said that this is in addition to the existing resources that are working in safeguarding across North Yorkshire Police. So when we look at the overall cost of this uplift of nearly £3 million, 2.9 million, that takes the overall spend on safeguarding capability to just over 9 million. It represents, these two uplifts together, a 35% increase in headcount in terms of the amount of people in the force that we have dedicated to safeguarding. So if I just touch on the resources on the phase 2 uplift, we agreed a Detective Chief Inspector who will really lead and own central safeguarding governance. That's good practice from other forces. What it does ensure is that you have continual capability and oversight of both child and adult safeguarding protection arrangements, and also includes the delivery of HMIC FRS recommendations, areas for improvement or causes for concern, and also scanning for best practice. So that's a really key role, and we are building capability around central safeguarding governance to strengthen the confidence we can have in the development of the capability. There's 3 additional sergeants going into the adult MASH, and we have 13 constables also going to safeguard adults. We work further down the list and you'll see an additional investment in a DVPO, that's a Domestic Violence Protection Order Coordinator, an investment into a Violent Offender Coordinator, and quite a significant investment, as you'll see, 8 people that will include Op Encompass, which is the ability for the police to communicate with schools, particularly when a young person and child has been involved in a domestic abuse incident, which was also highlighted in the report. And further support, the next 2, particularly OMU and Visor, are around strengthening the approach to offender management. And then you'll see there a domestic abuse research and report writer, and one that can complement the work of the vulnerability assessment team. So all in all, not just a significant uplift in resources, which is absolutely required, but also you can see where this resource is aligned to the risks as already highlighted in the report.
Scott, can I ask a question, please?
Of course,
These are about approved resources. When are we actually going to see them implemented?
Yeah, so a number of the phase 1 uplift are already implemented and in place. That's already happened, so the recruitment has taken place. In terms of the phase 2 uplift, obviously the agreement to uplift these is fairly recent, but as an example, the DCI for the central safeguarding governance has already been secured. So that resource is already there, but what we need to do, and we are doing and working hard on it, are securing those recruitment processes to make sure we get people in as quick as we can. But obviously these were agreed a couple of weeks ago in terms of the uplift, but that recruitment process is ongoing. We will have people internally who are really dedicated to this type of work. So I would anticipate some will come internally and some will have to recruit from outside. And of course, they may well come from other forces or other roles, but that will happen throughout the summer. And just to give you the reassurance, Commissioner, as part of the work I do of oversight and governance at the Vulnerability Board, the recruitment of these individuals will form a key element of ongoing monitoring and governance through that group.
Scott, can I ask a further question? Actually, you may not be able to answer it. It might be the Chief or the DEP, Mabs. So we've got here approved for the second phase 2. You've got this hot debrief in December, and we've just put this through now. Why has there been a time lag there? And I suppose I have concerns that I need to see immediate improvements, and we'll still have time for these for this phase 2 to be implemented. So Lisa, I see you've got your hands up. Can you come through?
Yes, Commissioner. So as you're aware, and this links back to the Peel report outcomes about our business insight and performance management and demand management work in the background needing to be completed. So some of the demand profiles of the force hadn't been updated as a result of our corporate services not being where they needed to be, or not having the right people with the right skills. So in order to form a proper evidence base of exactly which skills are required in which areas of business needs proper demand profiling. Otherwise, and as you'll have seen in the Peel report, HMIC made comment of the fact that we weren't basing the allocation of resources correctly on accurate demand work. So the demand work needed to be done first to make sure we were putting the right people in the right posts in the right places to achieve the outcomes that we need to safeguard the most vulnerable. And we didn't want to make a decision. And as you can see, it's a significant reallocation of resource. So this is not growth. This is movement of resource from a less threat, less risk area of policing. And that will impact on other members of the public. But of course, this is an absolute priority for us to safeguard children. But in order to make that decision, it has to have a strong evidence base. And that's why the delay occurred, in order to carry out that detailed demand profiling work.
Thank you, Lisa. I think it's important for the public. I'm sure they're asking, well, why is it happening now? So it was important that we covered that off to give an explanation. Thank you. Carry on, Scott.
Thank you, Commissioner. Dave, if you could move the slide on, please. Okay, just as a reminder of the 10 recommendations there. As I've said, we will focus on the ones where the work is required, but certainly on the others, just to reiterate what I said at the start, they're ready for submission to HMIC FRS to start getting signed off and resolved. But we need to focus on the areas, obviously, of risk and which require improvement. So what I propose to do is to answer the question you set at the start, Commissioner, and just go through. I am going to go through each recommendation, explain what was done after the original report briefly and what's been done since the re-inspection in December. So recommendation 1 was around reviewing the processes in the force control room pre-December 22. So this was on the back of the original inspection, which had been published around a year earlier. Training was provided to the staff in the force control room, particularly focused on missing from home and how we assess risk and deploy the appropriate resources. That we did that through something called power hours. So they're very short inputs, but they're very distilled and pointed around critically important information. And we've run that throughout the year on child protection topics. You'll see that reflected actually in the report, as you've highlighted through HMIC. There's been a simplification of the questions that the staff in the force control room asked to make sure we're identifying the risk appropriately. And our missing from home deployment procedures were amended accordingly. And there's also been a missing from home policy review, which it remains active, and so it should, because what we do is learn lessons as we go through the implementation of that policy based on best practice, and that may well get amended as we go through it. And that has actually happened over the past 12 months, so we've amended policy. And trigger plans have also been created for the most vulnerable children. That helps us assist in risk assessment processes with the force control room. And it demonstrates and gives us the information and intelligence about how to find the children that we're looking for, because obviously we need to do that as quickly as possible. Next slide, please, Dave. So what's been done then following the re-inspection and the comments made by HMIC FRS? So I think the key point to make as we go into this element on each slide is that following the verbal hot debrief of the re-inspection in December, all the actions were immediately captured as part of the force action plan. That's overseen by the Vulnerability Board and myself, as I've already outlined. So we weren't waiting for the report that's been published today to be available. We did take action quickly, and there's evidence of that through the governance. So the power hours have continued throughout this year for our call handling people, our dispatchers and our deployment managers. And that's been very much aimed at improving awareness and capability of child protection. During May of this month, we have digital forensics input. That links again back to a recommendation in the report. Our front line should be able to advise particularly young people about how to secure and preserve evidence on digital devices. And it also applies to our detectives to improve their submissions of forensic evidence through into regional scientific support. In June, we have another one planned that's looking beyond the obvious. This is a nationally acclaimed programme that's really about professional curiosity from our people to make sure that they understand vulnerability and they are asking the right questions of adults and children in different scenarios that we may well find them in. But that is a real, that's hailed nationally as a really good programme looking beyond the obvious, so we're implementing that. And during July and August, there's an input on identifying childhood neglect. And again, you return to some of the recommendation that's written in the report, where it identifies that although we're strong at the submission of PPNs with some improvement to do, that they're public protection notices, we haven't always then progressed a child neglect investigation as it should have been. And that's why we are doing the input on childhood neglect to improve the recognition of that and ensure the investigations take place. So I don't know if there's any questions on the slides on recommendation 1 before I move on to number 2.
Just, Scott, I think it's important to mention that the digital forensics input, there has been a delay there, hasn't there? And now that's very much on top of. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Yes, you're right, Commissioner. So with the volume of digital investigations that we know the police have to undertake now because of the proliferation of mobile phones and tablets and everything else, we know there was a backlog in digital forensics that was of some length, actually. But because of some investment of around 400k this year, we've obviously outsourced some of that provision to an accredited provider. And because of improved processes internally, we've now reduced that backlog, and the support to investigating officers is now a lot shorter. So their expectation and the service level agreement means that we are able to seize those devices, to interrogate them properly, and to understand what's on and to identify that risk. And again, that's relevant for a case that's in the report itself, as I'm sure you will have read, but also relevant around rape investigation, as you will know, and the ability to return phones to victims, which is critically important. So yeah, I hope that answers I think the deputy wants to come in.
Yes. Come in, Mabs.
Yeah, just to add on to that, Scott, just in relation to the volume of digital forensics, the revised service level agreement with the organisation is by the end of June, we'll have a turnaround time for, in particular, high-risk devices of 72 hours for high-risk investigations. So that's a considerable and significant reduction to when the Inspectorate came in, both for Peel, which this was obviously digital forensics was flagged, and the NCPI re-inspection.
Thank you. Back to you, Scott.
Okay, thank you. Dave, could move on to recommendation 2, please. So recommendation 2 was very focused around the police's ability to obtain the voice of the child. That's really critical in any safeguarding investigation when we really ensure that the young person or child is properly listened to. So significant progress in this area, and they're the words of HMIC FRS and not North Yorkshire Police. So voice of the child inputs to staff using a domestic abuse scenario to demonstrate how children can be witness to incidents and need to be spoken to and heard. We've adopted national best practice around the aware mnemonic. And I know from speaking to frontline officers that this has been really vital in them feeling have a structured approach to listen to the voice of the child. And you'll see at the bottom there what the aware and mnemonic actually means. Appearance, their words, activity, relationships and dynamics, and the environment that you might find the child in. It's not just about asking those questions in that structured way, though. It's about that translating onto public protection notices, which is the way that the police communicate with partners to ensure that we highlight those risks properly. And those public protection notices, which you will see further on in the slides, have increased both in volume and in quality. But that mnemonic has helped the quality of those public protection notices and it helps officers know what to observe and record. And we know that because HMIC have tested that and we've assured that ourselves. There's a bespoke keeping children safe site on the internet for officers with lots of updated guidance. And now the voice of the child and this mnemonic are embedded into our missing from home return forms to make sure we do capture the voice of the child, even though they may have returned home. And again, you'll see a case study in the report talking about a missing young man who was at some risk, who returned home, and we didn't do that. Well, that's what we do now when people return home, when we do those missing interviews once they're safe.
Scott, can I ask a question, please?
Yes, of course.
How are you assuring yourself that you are capturing this, and where is it documented?
Yeah, so this is the only way you can do this in any meaningful sense is through dip sampling. So it's about dip sampling the records that we hold in our systems. It's about dip sampling public protection notices. And it's then about capturing that within a formal assurance process, which I've got the head of safeguarding sat next to me, actually, Heather, if you wanted to pick that up. And she can maybe explain that in a little bit more detail.
Yeah, if I may, Commissioner, so as part of my team, I have a quality assurance team within safeguarding, and one of the areas that they've been auditing monthly has been around the PPN submission, around where we've missed any incidents where they should have been submitted, and also looking at the quality of those submissions. And also as part of the work that's undertaken by my inspector within the vulnerability assessment team, they're constantly looking at the quality of the submissions, including whether or not the voice of the child has been recognised and recorded. And actually they do a significant piece around if there's any learning or rework that needs done. So that's shared with the officers individually and also their supervision, so that we're providing that constant feedback loop to make sure that we're addressing these areas. And that's part of my process of how this particular recommendation is being quality assured.
Thank you.
Next slide, please, Dave. Thank you. So the question, between December 22 and now then, so this is following the re-inspection again, just to remind people. So bespoke voice of the child video has been made for custody staff, and that's helped them to be upskilled, and that's been rolled out on their dedicated development days, covering really what it's like for a child to enter custody. We know, unfortunately, young people do have to be arrested and investigated, but we need to make sure we're treating them absolutely properly when they get into there. And the second part of that is the voice of the child one-to-one refresher. That's currently ongoing now, and that has been really well received by the front line. That's a video and training pack. It's to demonstrate, really, that HMIC were very supportive of this. It's about continual reinforcement of voice of the child and their importance in safeguarding investigations. And it demonstrates an officer communicating with a child and the best practice of how to do that. That won't stop. What we can't afford to do throughout this whole inspection is kind of draw a line under it and say, well, we finished that work. What this does is set the baseline for how we continue to reinforce our capability around safeguarding children. So you will see throughout the presentation there's a return to training, because obviously we have quite a churn in staff on the front line, and you have to keep reinforcing it. So that's what we're doing around voice of the child and recommendation 2. Can we move on, please, David? So this is a really critical one. This is the first one where we know there's significant work to do around missing from home. So pre-December 22, training was delivered for response officers during December on exploitation and missing children to really upskill their understanding of that. And the Force Control Room, as I already identified, have had also training, what we call power hour, so we can give them it. That's a common method of training in Force Control Rooms to be able to give that information. So between December 22 and now then, and I think this is where there is a requirement to be absolutely transparent in where we are organisationally. There is a cultural shift required in the perception and management of risk, particularly at inspector level. That's critically important. And this month we have all our critical incident inspectors. So these are the people who work 24/7 and are responsible for overseeing the highest risk incidents that come to the force, along with our force incident manager who sits in the control room. It's training to 75 individuals between the 11th and 19th of May on what their responsibilities are, expectations, and cultural reset, I would go as far as, in terms of how they assess and manage risk of young people. You will see in the report there are some really damaging comments, I think, around the use of language of some of the critical incident inspectors on records. We've already picked that up internally, but the formal training program, if you like, is taking place this month to reset that. There are also new IT enhancements to oversee missing management from September 23. Put in simple terms, this is about moving to a system that's not paper-based, which you will see in the report, that's online, that captures tasking, live time, is able to task officers to do certain things, and the inspector sets those tasks, and then for those tasks to be reviewed to ensure that they've been complied with. That's into the testing environment, that system, during June. Training's happening over the summer with the front line, because we know we can't deliver an IT product without doing the proper training. And then it will go live in September. So that's a real step forward, I think, in terms of MISPA management and the capturing of really important information intelligence about young people that we can then re-access should they go missing again in a timely and accurate way.
Scott, can I ask a training about how you record the question on how you record the training, and that you're making sure that no officers like drop between the gaps, as it were, and do you come back and retrain at some point?
Yeah, so I think this forms a critical part of the accreditation of critical incident inspectors, if you like. You're almost at that level of saying you have to be able to do these things well to perform the role to the required level. I could tell you now that the 4 people that aren't booked on those courses but will be, for a whole host of different reasons, nothing to do with the individuals, but out the ones that need to go on it, I've got oversight exactly of who's on that and who isn't. And we do capture who's attended those courses. I've, as you know, I've come from a neighbouring force where there was really critical risk around young people, and the response of our inspectors to ensure that that risk is properly mitigated in a timely way is fundamentally important. So we will capture all that, Commissioner, and it'll be all subject to an audit trail. What's really important, though, it doesn't stop there. It's then about an immediate assurance programme that looks at their decision making, their recording of their rationale, the recording of their actions, and that's where, through our performance framework, we hold people to account for, quite rightly, the standards that we expect them to deliver. And that's what you will see then follow that training very quickly. So that will happen into the summer. Obviously, I've mentioned the training of the frontline staff in relation to the IT change that's going to happen, and if you like, digitalise our missing from home records. But importantly, and I did mention it earlier, but I don't want it to get lost, because in the report it was really highlighted strongly, the central missing team, or if you like, the missing from home and exploitation capability is insufficient. There is that investment of 6 PCs to work within the local hubs to improve that, and their responsibility is really to engage with partners and share that information and intelligence in a timely way to reduce the risk. And I can see that having real benefits in improvement.
Scott, can I ask a question? Because I know that in the report it refers to records holding detailed information to help find missing children weren't always clearly accessible on the forces system. So when we talk about the the new enhancement, IT enhancement, does that cover that and improve it?
Yes, it does, and that's precisely what it's designed to do. So put it in simple terms, at the moment the officers will record a missing from person on a paper record. What of course that means is an officer in location X doesn't necessarily know, unless the information is uploaded onto the system, what we hold on that individual and what the risks are and where they might be found. Once we digitalise that properly, then that information becomes available to people so they can see it. And that's the real benefit of a system of that nature. Heather, I don't know if you want to add to that.
No, I think that is the benefit, and actually it will enable our inspectors to have a much more enhanced risk assessment process, because they'll have the full intelligence picture on that missing child and any previous episodes. So I would expect to see much more consistency and appropriate risk assessment as part of that enhancement as well.
So can I just ask about right now? This isn't going to be implemented till September 23. So obviously some officers are still working on paper base, which is, I can't quite understand that. So what's happening now to make sure that that information is not going missing or isn't uploaded? What is actually happening right now about that?
So Heather, do you want to?
Yeah, so at the minute, the paper booklets are scanned onto the system, which is obviously not particularly efficient, but my centralised missing team review every missing episode of a child each day, and they're extracting that information and data, and then collating that and submitting it onto the electronic system where it's appropriate, or sharing with partners. It's just It's double keying. It's not as efficient as it could be. And obviously that will resolve once we get the new system in place.
So has that process improved of late, or is it still where it was at? Because I'm really concerned about this.
The issue with the centralised team has been around capacity. So that process is still ongoing and gets obviously reviewed daily in terms of any issues get escalated to me if they can't meet that demand. But that's one of the reasons why the exploitation and missing team are getting that significant uplift, to make sure that they've got the capacity to better manage this area of business, particularly with our relationship with partners.
Thank you.
Thank you. So that completes the update on recommendation 3, but that is really a critical one for us. As much as we've covered 1 and 2 and the progress that's been made, this is really critical around missing from home for young people. If I can move on to recommendation 4, which is the next slide. Please, Dave, it's on there. Yep. So pre-December 22, what was said when they came back for the re-inspection? Strong partnership arrangements with other agencies, as we would expect. And I was with the staff from North Yorkshire Council yesterday on the safeguarding down at County Hall. And there's really clear to me there's really good relationships in the teams at all levels, which is a real credit to those who've been involved in this and absolutely fundamental to keeping people safe. Increased public protection notices, which have been submitted to triage. Again, let's not forget, this is how the police and other agencies actually inform the partnership about the risks and the voice of the child and all the awareness information that we gather. And there's an enhanced escalation process now with partners, which was picked up in the original report about how we escalated risk. So from December to now, the key recommendation from HMIC was to look at how we can better align processes across the 2 local authorities in our MASH and our multi-agency exploitation hubs, if you like. So that was really important. And I know that work's ongoing, but again, that's done with partners. We've got some agreement in there around changes to processes, which is positive, and we'll continue to work on that. So that's recommendation 4. Dave, you can move on, please. So this is where you get some information about the reviewed of the referral processes. So recommendation 5 then. So pre the re-inspection, this was an area that's highlighted as having made significant progress. There was close working relationships which had developed with both local authorities. The referral process was changed. The vulnerability assessment team centrally are the real quality assurers on this work from a police perspective, who then feed that into the broader safeguarding arrangements on a daily basis with the 2 local authorities. And we can see, I've already mentioned, the ongoing work between the local authorities and the police to get closer alignment, to get some consistency across the whole of North Yorkshire. But I think that the public protection notice data at the bottom of the page is telling. So between 21 and 23, essentially a 63% increase of public protection notices. Really important. That's not just volume, it's quality. And when I spoke to the North Yorkshire leadership yesterday, actually, that they've really welcomed this. So we know that, and HMIC say this, we know that it's having a positive impact. So that's good. Next slide, please, Dave. So again, the referral process between December and now, we continue with developing a pro forma used by the officers for the content of the safeguarding referrals. That's to make sure that we're driving the right information. We want to extract the right information to drive that partnership activity. There's a bespoke pro forma used by the offender management unit. So now we're starting to talk about the improvements around offender management, which is a key one for the report, and also for the online abuse team, a pro forma for them to make sure they can submit those referrals. So you'll refer back to report and a case study in there around an online abuse investigation where there was a delay in the PPN submission because we were waiting for a warrant to be executed. That wouldn't happen now through the central team. This process makes sure we can submit the PPN and discuss with partners how best to safeguard those young people involved. There's a process for quality assurance of referrals. So at the moment, that's done by the vulnerability assessment team centrally. and we feed back to officers where they haven't put the appropriate information on those public protection notices. And there's also bite-sized on learning and development to enhance officers' knowledge of how a referral is used, and once they submit it, where it goes. And that's been well received as well. In common with other forces, actually, when you're asking the front line to do something, they need to understand why and what happens to it. So that's recommendation 5, unless there's any questions on that one. No? Okay. Recommendation 6 then, another critical one. So if we looked at missing from home being critical, this one certainly is as well, child protection investigations. So pre-December 22, so what HMIC found in December was, unlike previously where the force has been criticised heavily for not appropriately allocating crimes to those with the training and the experience to deal with them, particularly relevant in child protection investigations, the force had implemented a crime allocation procedure which clarified roles and responsibilities, and HMIC picked up on this as being, it was working. The right crimes are going to the right officers. There's increased specialist child abuse investigation development program, that's called SCIDIP for short, where child abuse investigators should be accredited in SCIDIP. As of the 26th of April, 93 of those individuals have gone through the program and 30 portfolios have been signed off. There is more work to do to get these portfolios signed off. Every child investigator should have that portfolio signed off, and that's what we're working on achieving. And what we also picked up was improved supervision of investigations across a range, both on the front line, because lower risk safeguarding investigations will go to uniformed officers on the front line, where the higher risk will go into specialist investigators. That's in line with other forces, that's what they do, but it's the assessment of those crimes that's really important to make sure that you get it right. And it's not just the investigation, it's the safeguarding too.
Scott, can I ask a question about how many have you got left to do SCIDIP and how many more portfolios are to be signed off?
Okay, Heather, so I know that we've just done an investment into frontline safeguarding teams, and we've uplifted our detective profile to be able to do that. And I'll come on to that in a moment. I'd have to come back to you with that exact information, Commissioner, if that's okay. Mabs?
Yeah, if I can just come in as part of that. So the initial assessment in terms of what we needed to be trained was done on basis of what our previous sort of investigation structure looked like. And as a result of what Scott has touched upon there is, so as you're aware, Commissioner, we're creating specialist safeguard investigation teams on each of the local commands. So separation from an omni-competent investigation model as we have now to a more specialist focused model. As a result of that, in terms of the uplifted specialist safeguarding, we'll have to rerun the demand modelling to assess what our future training requirements are going to be, because this is a moment in time. We already know the uplift that's going to be required as of 1st of April 24, and correct me if I'm wrong, Scott, is it about another 30 officers that we have to uplift into? That's the initial demand modelling.
Yeah, obviously what we've got is we've got SCIDIP trained officers both in central functions because they're doing child protection, but we've also got them out on the command. So I know with the agreed uplift, we've got 76 detective constables who will be focused on child protection investigations across the 3 areas. That doesn't, of course, include the central teams either, the online teams and everybody else who need the training. So there are 93 trained. It's now about, we've agreed that structure, ensuring that the accreditation and training sat in the right place, which is, I'm not hesitant in not understanding where the numbers are. It's about the right people with the right accreditation doing the right job, which is where we'll head into over the next 4 weeks.
And if I could just, sorry, Commissioner, I was just going to say apologies to cut across you there. If you remember when the first inspection was done, we had, I think it was 2 people trained in the organisation. So it just shows the significant investment in time and effort to try and upskill our officers to make sure that the appropriate staff are trained and accredited. And then the crimes are being allocated, which is the important thing, to the right people, which is what the Inspectorate did find. They didn't say our crimes were being allocated to the incorrect staff all across the organisation. They were going to the correct people, but capacity is an issue which we are aware of.
Thank you. So I'm interested in a timeline for those staff to get trained, and also where that evidence will sit. Will it go to the vulnerability board to be documented in the governance route? Where will it be accessed?
It will, Commissioner. That is a fundamental part of what the vulnerability board should be overseeing, is capability and capacity. Excuse me. I do know we've got 2 additional SkyDip courses booked for later this year. I haven't got the specific dates in front of me, but that's incredibly important, because as we restructure around dedicated child protection units, what we must avoid and what we won't let happen is untrained officers go into those units. It's not just about numbers, it's about accreditation and capability to do the job that we need them to do to protect children. So I'm quite happy to provide your office with the dates of those further courses post this meeting, and to provide further updates as a result of the vulnerability board about we've got the right people in the right place.
Thank you.
So just move on to the next slide, please, David. Sorry, that's it. So the deputy's already mentioned here, the creation of safeguarding investigation teams. So what this essentially means is we've currently got CIDs within those commands. Those criminal investigation departments are taking serious assault, adult rape, and obviously child protection investigations too. We made a decision as an executive team, quite right, that we split that. So we have dedicated child protection capability and core CID capability. So we're very clear about what work needs to go where. Demand modelling has been done. That came to chief officers recently in terms of how many people we need to ensure that they're effective units. And now I've got the responsibility to implement that. And the plan is to have that implemented by July of this year in terms of a split and having the resources allocated. In the meantime, we have done a piece of work organisationally to ensure that what we call our PIP, accredited detectives, PIP level 2, are in PIP level 2 jobs, so that we've got our detectives exactly where we need them. But of course, child protection investigators also need that enhanced training. SkyDip is one. There are a number of other elements of training. So that numbers of people in the right place with the right training is a key element of the safeguarding restructure. So that will be coming in, as I've said, in early summer. There's a case study response to online CSEA, and that's training ongoing to show the voice of the child captures all aspects of vulnerability. There's a bespoke training to frontline officers delivered around the online risk as well. There's work ongoing to improve the investigation template. So you'll see in the HMIC report that they talk about the use of investigation templates. What they made a comment on was they're sometimes used inconsistently. Some of the reason for that is you've got very experienced detectives in there, and detective sergeants who know what they're doing in investigation, but the template is there to be used on those investigations. So again, that's something we need to pick up. And again, between December and now, the templates have been embedded on our systems. I won't go into the technical service directory app, on our systems, so that early intervention support can be achieved at the earliest opportunity. So that's the investigation improvement work, really key to making sure, again, that victims receive the service that they should receive. Is there any questions on recommendation 6?
No.
Okay. Recommendation 7. Well, this was about improving child sexual exploitation. So pre-December 22, multi-agency child exploitation structures were reviewed and improved. That's again highlighted in the report. There was an enhanced focus on the victim, on child victims' experiences. There were specialist teams on command to focus on perpetrators, and this was really about targeting those individuals who were showing they were perpetrating CSE on young people and children, and getting a greater insight into that. And there was a new training delivered to response officers on what exploitation looks like. So our front line were able to recognise the signs, if you like. So between December and now then, I've already mentioned the importance of that critical incident inspector training to recognise signs of CSE amongst our missing children. We do have, you'll see in the report, it said the previous child sexual exploitation problem profile hadn't been refreshed since 2020. That has just been refreshed, and I've chaired the last 2 force level intelligence tasking meetings, and that has been presented at both meetings. And what we're waiting for now is some partnership data to complement and strengthen that profile. We're in discussions with partners about what data we think they might hold that can do that. But we've also picked up some best practice from Nottinghamshire that will help us understand what that needs to look like. And again, really important to stress, I'll go back to the uplift of resources, 6 PCs approved into a central child exploitation team to ensure we're not missing information and intelligence to keep the children of North Yorkshire safe. So again, that will enhance the work in that area. David, can we move on to the next one, please? The next recommendation related to the improved use of police protection powers. So again, before the re-inspection, we've done a lot of work with our sergeants and inspectors. Inspectors are usually the people who authorise police protection orders. In other words, where a child is at risk of coming to significant harm, that's where we can take them into police protection. There's a new escalation policy created with partners, and this is to make sure that when we do take children into police protection, that they're treated with respect, care, and they don't come to a police station as a place of safety, as an example, because it's not appropriate. We need to make sure we find places for children to go to keep them out of significant harm that aren't police stations. And actually what HMIC found was we don't do that. We don't bring them into police stations, other than in one case, which was exceptional and which we're discussing with health partners. And there's also a new scrutiny panel being developed that gets attendance from children's social care and the head of partnerships to really review where we've applied that police power to make sure it's been proportionate and necessary. And also a new template to address recording and consistency issues about how we use the power, when we've used it, and then what's happened post the use of that power. So Dave, next slide, please. Between December and now then, we've done also some additional bite-line learning to develop a package around the use of police protection orders, and that will be completed in July 23, so a couple of months away. The next one is really key. There's current training on neglect for frontline response officers, whereby it covers a scenario where we're exercising the power, but as HMIC have picked up, we don't always then recognise the signs of neglect and investigate it. And it's really important because they can be not nuanced as such, but they are less obvious than signs of physical assault or other matters that might not be as obvious. Really important we capture those scenarios about neglect and we investigate that properly. So again, that training programme is taking place on the dedicated training days that our frontline uniformed response officers have scheduled between now and August. And there's also going to be a new template to capture the neglect elements, which we're awaiting the launch of, which will address the areas around not identifying neglect properly that are raised in the report. And again, this is all managed through the vulnerability board. The big question is how you quality assure this, but Heather's answered some of that and I'll pick it up at the end. Next slide, please, Dave. So again, recommendation 9, I think, is probably one of the most damning in the report around how North Yorkshire Police approaches offender management. It's important to understand the journey here. Pre-December 22, an action plan was created, but it's fair to say that there were performance issues within the unit itself, both at a senior leadership level and more broadly. Those issues have been addressed, and I won't go into any further detail for this meeting. All the staff, as of last month, are now what we call VISA trained. So that's a national database on violent and sexual offenders, so we can properly understand the risk that those individuals cause to the public of North Yorkshire and manage it appropriately. You'll see HMIC said in December that we didn't adhere to authorised professional practice, and that was a real gap. If you link that back to the leadership conversation I've just had, then there's necessary driving of improvements. I think Heather would say, I'll let Heather come in at the end, just to give you an update on her view of where we are with offender management, and there's ongoing equality assurance work taking place. So, Heather, I don't know if you want to pick up the work that you've done. I know this has been intensive for the beginning of this year.
Yeah, so if I may, Commissioner, NCPR re-inspection report really brought together a number of concerns that have been highlighted within this arena. It is, as Mr. Bisset says, some scrutiny and performance issues within the team. Hadn't realised the improvements that I would have expected. Those have been addressed, and as such, the new inspector within that team has a really rigorous process of scrutiny, measuring every aspect of APP and our expectations of delivery in this particular area. I'm very mindful as head of safeguarding that this is one of our highest risk areas of business in policing, and actually we need to get it right. From my perspective, from December to now, I am significantly assured that the improvements have been made across all of the areas and improvements that were noted. What I have ongoing at the minute is some independent quality assurance work ongoing within the team to make sure that we're meeting each of those improvement areas and that they can be signed off effectively. So that quality assurance work is ongoing, and then with the uplifted resourcing into that team means that we will meet the increasing capacity issues as well to future-proof the work of the team.
So Heather, forgive a question then. So for me, it's how are you assuring yourself? How are you doing that? How are you satisfying yourself that this work is being carried out? What are you seeing? How are you going about it to find out that evidence, and where is it being collected and held?
So the inspector has implemented a series of measures within the team which get held against the sergeants and the constables, and they get monthly reviewed with each individual of the team. But to provide that independent assurance, so they're not marking their own homework, in essence, I have an independent member of quality assurance that is looking at every single action that's been identified for improvement and is dip sampling and auditing reports from January onwards on our advisor management system to make sure that we're picking up all of those issues. And obviously that feedback then gets fed back to the team. There have been numerous personal briefings by myself and the DCI, and that information and understanding of the team of what the expectations is absolutely clear. So they've got complete clarity of purpose in terms of what they need to do in this particular area of business.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Dave. Move on to the next slide, please. So, the management of sex offenders. This is the work again being done since the re-inspection. It's important that our staff who work in offender management also can submit public protection notices to enhance the quality of referrals to social care, because they will gather information and intelligence when they're out there. So a bespoke referral form has been created for them to do that. There's a monitoring of every PPN completed for quality assurance and one-to-one feedback for the officers in the offender management unit. And then importantly, Heather's mentioned the independent assurance, if you like, that sits outside the team. And I will touch on that at the end in terms of the role of central safeguarding governance. But there's also a peer review to take place this month by Humberside Police. That's independent. Obviously, they got an outstanding in their appeal in this area. So they have agreed to come across and do a peer review with us and then share that report. And that will help us learn and improve further. So unless there's any more questions on recommendation 9.
No, thank you.
Thank you. So finally then, the final recommendation was a review of detention of children. I won't go into this in too much detail because this then formed part of another inspection within criminal justice and Peel later in the year. But you can see that from the original report in December 22, the work that we did undertake, and I've already touched on this, about the understanding of custody staff and how they should treat children when they come into custody. So you'll see there the work that was done pre-December. but that custody inspection and that work around children has now been remitted to a different inspection area. So we will also seek to get that signed off because of that reason within the NCPI. It doesn't make the activity any less important. It just means it's being managed elsewhere. So I hope that's been informative, Commissioner. That completes the detailed breakdown of what North Yorkshire Police have done on each of those recommendations 1 to 10.
Thanks very much, Scott. That was very thorough. Thank you. I suppose I'd like to touch on, please, the governance route. So we've talked about vulnerability board. Now, member of my team does go to the vulnerability board, and I know that the NCPI is a regular agenda item. However, I have heard that, from our side, there are concerns that maybe it's not given the time it needs. Do you think it does? And do you think that, or if it doesn't, would it not be better with its own forum to give the attention that it needs, Scott?
So I think that's a really valid point. So I think number one is the vulnerability board should manage all things safeguarding for North Yorkshire Police. I think that is the right environment to start with. I think the improvement plan is so significant that there are a couple of things actually. One is we're discussing governance as a chief officer group this Friday actually, and the changes to that. And what I'm proposing is that it goes to 1 day a month, so it's a full day. So we do the inspection work in the morning, and HMI, CFRS and AFIs, causes for concern. And then in the afternoon, we link that to, for example, oversight of the delivery of a different safeguarding structure, so that both running the business and changing the business are done in the same forum. I wouldn't want to split it. But just touching on the resourcing, I am concerned about the amount of resource that's committed to delivering the plan. And we've already considered a proposal as a chief officer team around a performance analyst in the safeguarding environment to really present well-tested analytical data to support our decision making and understanding of performance. Project management, I think it needs project management discipline about milestone plans, and the team have done a great job, and that has existed. It will be wrong to say it hasn't, but I think we can enhance that, particularly around the whole safeguarding environment. And then I do think, and this is a painful decision, the inclusion of 1 or 2 more subject matter experts. The caveat with that is they can only come from one place, and that's the place where they're actually delivering service to victims. But while we're in the position we're in, we need to improve the intensity and the resource to make sure that as quickly as possible all these recommendations and AFIs are addressed. So we're making those decisions now, essentially. But I don't want also to lose sight of the fact that the creation of a more resilient central safeguarding governance capability is critically important to make sure we don't get back into this position again. The testing, the dip sampling, the reality checking, the performance will ensure we can deliver the best standards of service possible. We're not there yet, and we need to be. So as I've said, we've already appointed around central safeguarding governance leadership. That unit will absorb existing resources. So Heather's already mentioned independent assurance that we have working around safeguarding, but it will also be enhanced with other resources. So the short question is, vulnerability board's right. It needs to be extended in terms of its time, and there'll be additional resources applied to it.
Mabs, can I bring you in?
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner. I mean, Scott covered the key points of it, and I think it's worthwhile just referencing the conversation we had with a lead inspector on a National Child Protection Inspection, and they were very strong in their view that actually Vulnerability Board is the right place for this to be embedded in as part of a core part of the governance in the organisation. And it's a really valid question that you ask. In terms of where the Vulnerability Board reports into, with regards to the areas for improvement recommendations, is the Risk and Assurance Board. And a member of your office does attend the Risk and Assurance Board. At the previous Risk and Assurance Board, I did challenge within that meeting in relation to the timescales and the training plan for the inspectors, which Scott very kindly picked up and really did energise our response around it as a result of doing so with the team. So these core and key things which are of risk to us as an organisation are discussed as part of the Risk and Assurance Board. The reason it comes into there is because that's the area where we discuss the overarching improvement plan as well for the organisation. And as you can see from the presentation, and I hope the details provided that assurance, this is not being dealt with in isolation. It's being linked and dealt with as part of the organisational redesign to improve service to the public, linked to appeal inspection as well.
And there is no doubt about it, Mabs, that there is an awful lot of work going on around that appeal inspection. And I do know that it dovetails into it. I suppose, Lisa, can I come to you now that you do chair the improvement board for the HMICFRS inspections, and that, will you be satisfied that you are seeing tangible evidence coming to that board that there has been improvements made and will carry on? Are you satisfied with this improvement plan?
So thank you, Commissioner. And yes, to complete the governance cycle, if you like. So on a monthly basis now, there is an improvement board that I chair that holds the Deputy Chief Constable and senior leadership of the organisation to account for delivery of those areas of business. It's RAG graded, so it's really clear to see red, amber, green status of the direction of travel of those actions, and the sign off of the completion of those actions is covered at that meeting. And also there is a specific agenda item for assurance and inspection activity. So that is reality testing of how do we know that that thing is meeting the standards required. So we had our improvement board yesterday, and there was a lot of focus there on the so what. So people coming forward saying, yes, we've got this document, we've got this strategy in place, people are doing X. So what difference is that making to actually, for example, safeguarding children in society, and really nailing on the quality and standards checks of the difference it's making, rather than just ticking a box that something's been implemented, that it's having a real impact on delivery of service and in our mission of keeping people safe and feeling safe.
Mabs, can I come to you? Because originally you headed up the Gold group, didn't you? Can you explain a bit more about that? And also about maybe a lack of communication, maybe led your group to believe that, more was actually going on and evidence was there. Because there is a biggie for me here that, we asked for regular reassurance, which we got, that the concerns were going to be taken forward. But I think it's really important. We've heard about the governance route now, but about that goal group that was set up and what maybe went, with respect, a little bit astray communication-wise.
Yeah, and it's a really valid question, Commissioner. So the Gold Group is fully documented. Again, a member of your office used to sit on that Gold Group when it was in place. It's all documented, it's all recorded, all the actions have been recorded in terms of the updates that were provided to me as Gold with regards to the overarching oversight. It's clear from the presentation that you've had pre-December 22, the re-inspection, there's a lot of progress that has been made, but there's a significant amount of things that we still needed to do. What that Gold Group, I guess, the key learning, in particular of how the silver and the bronze groups were functioning, is the audit and the testing. And it's linked to what the chief has outlined with regards to some of our ability around assurance within the corporate services, is the immaturity of our assurance model in the organisation in terms of how we adequately test. As a result of that, and obviously, as you're aware, with the movement towards sort of strengthening our corporate delivery, in particular around the business design and assurance, that element of testing has now moved under a chief inspector. And already we're seeing a much more clearer alignment of where that group focuses their activity against areas of risk and how it accurately captures the reality of where we are. For an example, I can give you, not linked to the NCPI, use of police powers. We've just done some assurance activity around use of body-worn video, which is a report I can share with your office with regards to our confidence of how often body-worn video is used in stop and search. And the testing and the detail of that testing has actually identified a number of areas for Elliot as chair of that board to focus upon, because it's not where it needs to be in terms of assurance. That's what should have taken place last year through the silver and bronze mechanisms that were in place. The other part is, and I think it links to the appeal inspection itself, is the magnitude and the recognition of the amount of things, as positive as we were trying to be, that we were trying to resolve one part of a system, which was around safeguarding. And as you can see, it's taking the best part of a £2.49 million enhanced investment in order to improve our safeguarding response with an additional 35 officers, not including the police staff. As hopeful as we were, it was a little bit premature of us to think that actually we could address it without doing all the broader work. And it's clear from the evidence base that's been provided as a result of the safeguarding business case, it's required a significant investment, which we couldn't make at the time, because also, as you're aware, Commissioner, last year we were battling with, in some response teams, 14 officers on nights. So we didn't have the experience either to take from the front line through that gold group. So we didn't have the ability, and I didn't have the ability as gold for the movement of resource across the board. The decision on how we reconfigured our probationer development unit has added an additional 139 officers from our professional development unit onto the front line, which has then enabled the movement of officers that we needed to make in order to key areas of risk. If we'd made them decisions last year, it would have left the front line exposed and our ability to respond to immediate incidents at risk. So we've had to balance it very carefully. Hence, the embedding of the NCPI through Vulnerability Board and then now going into the Risk and Assurance Board is the right route around governance, but the learning has been captured and fed back to the individuals who are providing the updates, which I can give you assurance on, because like I said, like yourself, the provided assurance was all documented and recorded to say where we were against the plan. But the testing and assurance needed to be much strengthened, which we have done.
Okay, thank you. Right, if anybody has any other questions, please shout right now. I don't think there are. Thank you very much. Thank you to Scott, Mabs and Lisa for giving us that presentation. Now I'd like to go over to public questions, please. So I'm not quite sure if we've got any more come in, but I know that we certainly had 3 to start with. Okay, so we've had 3, and I'm going to take the first 2 together. I'm not going to read it out, it's quite lengthy and we're running over, but you can probably give a scan over it. And I think it's a really important question. I'm going to take them both together. So Mr. McDonald from York and Mr. Cook from Harrogate, thank you very much. So certainly from my point of view, my office were present at most of the operational meetings following the initial NCPI report and sought assurances at these meetings. And we were led to believe that North Yorkshire Police were in a better position than they were ultimately were, and we accept this. And as a result, we have entirely overhauled our scrutiny and assurance process. I have clearly set out how I will hold North Yorkshire Police to account for delivery. And part of this is a refreshed terms of reference for my live streamed online accountability meetings from the end of this month, which will include a standing agenda item for the Chief Constable to report on progress against the HMIC FRS improvement plan in a public forum. This means the improvements can be closely monitored by the public and that I can seek assurance on behalf of the public that this is positive progress is happening in a very transparent way. Me and my office's scrutiny work does not stop at these meetings and will continue in every scrutiny panel, Executive Board, HMIC FRS Improvement Board, Risk and Assurance Board, and other frequent interactions I have with the Chief Officers, and where I will expect to receive assurance and, more importantly now than ever, evidence that the services are on track with their plans. I have not accepted what I am told. My team and I have and will require evidence of transformation in all areas of improvement going forward. So all this information and our assurance framework is on my website, which you can access. Please, if you have any questions, I have an open door policy. I am more than happy to take any member of the public through any questions you have about how I and my team scrutinise and work closely with North Yorkshire Police. Right, can we go on to the third question, please? There's another question from Mr. McDonald, thank you very much. And it's to the Chief Constable. She's presiding over a failing organisation for 5 years as the Chief Constable. The Child Protection Inspection on January 22nd, Custody Inspection on September the 22nd, and appeal in March 23, and a Child Protection Re-inspection in May 23. This is evidence of poor leadership decisions on how the force has been structured and managed during her time as chief over the past 5 years. When will she accept responsibility and accountability for this? Lisa, can I pass this on to you, please?
No, thank you, Commissioner. And I'm not sure whether it's Mr. MacDonald or somebody else who has previously asked me the same question. I think at our appeal PAM, when the same question was raised, and I will give a similar answer to that. I'm more than happy to expand on it outside of this meeting. But for the purpose of this meeting, the organisation over the past several years, as opposed to the past 5 years, has been through a significant amount of change. So the structure of the organisation is not where it needs to be, and we are reviewing that. So during that time, we've had a significant churn of chief officers in the force, so a lack of stability in terms of our chief officer structures and those changes in chief officer leadership. So at assistant chief constable level, I think we've had a churn of around 10 different individuals across 2 posts in those 5 years, which does not create the stability and delivery of performance and consistency and continuity of that performance delivery. That's one of the reasons why we're failing to deliver in some of these areas. And secondly, we've had a significant amount of change in terms of 2 very significant change programmes. So one you may have heard of called Transform 2020. So that was a change programme where we looked at a £10 million reduction in resources to make the organisation more efficient. That implementation took place during the period of COVID, and as a result of that was not properly implemented or evaluated, and I think has caused us some difficulties in terms of capacity and capability across some functions in the organisation. And secondly, for the past 3 years, we've been implementing, or nearly 4 years now, implementing a shared service with fire and rescue services. Again, a significant piece of work when you try to collaborate a group of emergency services and continue to deliver performance. This was commented on in detail. You will see that the corporate function areas of our peel inspection are inadequate, and that refers to the structures, strategic direction, financial planning, workforce planning, and some of those areas we've talked about today, that we are now undertaking an organisational review and an operational review to ensure that our structures in the organisation are fit for purpose to deliver. And those structures were not in place and haven't been in place. You've heard about the inspection regime. So the assurance and testing function as part of our shared enabling services has not been the structure, capacity or competence that it needed to be to deliver against some of the assurance that we needed that things were being carried out. This is a very lengthy and complex subject, so I will pause there, Commissioner, but more than happy to answer in more detail to Mr. MacDonald if he would like further details about any of those aspects that I've mentioned today.
Thank you, Lisa. Right, so we've come to the end of the meeting now. Oh no, sorry, Mr. Cook. Sorry, I've missed that. I didn't see that we had another one. Here we go. So in 2018, North Yorkshire Police rolled out a programme of tablets for officers. Are these tablets or updated tablets still being used? Okay, so this obviously refers to a piece in the Harrogate Informer. Who would like to take that, Mabs?
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner. The tablets have been superseded by laptops, so all our officers are issued with 4G-enabled Lenovo ThinkPad laptops and also with Samsung mobile devices. As part of the Risk and Assurance Board, we've just discussed a digital transformation strategy to look at how do we improve what we've already given to our officers and staff across the organisation, and some of that is from user groups, in particular officers who are wanting to provide their feedback around how we can make them devices much more user-friendly and better for the public we serve. So all that work is in hand and is ongoing. So to answer Mr. Cook's, yes, mobile technology is at the forefront, is something that we find integral to running an efficient and effective police force, and it provides better service to the public and victims. So it's all still in place, and we continue to maximise any opportunities we have. In addition to that, we're also using support from the National Police Digital Services, who are coming into the organisation to look at how do we better use what's available from them. And that's a national IT provider, which is part of the National Police Chiefs Council.
Thanks, Babs, and thank you very much for those questions too. So it's the end of the meeting, so it just takes for me to leave with a statement really that I remain absolutely committed to the public and the victims of crime as I work tirelessly and take extremely seriously my responsibility to the public to ensure that they receive the standard of policing that they deserve. The public rely on North Yorkshire Police to get their job right, which is ultimately to keep them safe and feeling safe. And as Commissioner, I expect to see a significant improvement when the Inspectorate revisit the end of 2023. And I will continue to seek insight from victims of crime across our region. Thank you. If you have any further questions, please do not hesitate to contact my office, where I'm very happy to meet with you and or answer any correspondence. Thank you very much to everybody who's attended and watched this online meeting today. It will be recorded and put onto my website, so you'll be able to go back to it if you so wish. Thank you very much, everyone.